Hi there, everyone. Welcome to this panel webinar on digital marketing and the SaaS sector. Today, I've got some quality speakers and experts in the field with me to give you exclusive insights into how to improve your marketing's effectiveness in this sector. We will also be covering content from a joint survey and report commissioned by Fountain and the creative copywriter. We've got data from software consumers and SaaS marketing decision makers. So this should be some valuable insight for you. My name is David Cooper. I'm the marketing manager at Fountain and I'll be your host today. But I'm not the one you're here for. Today, your panelists come to you from all over the globe, from Canada to the UK and Israel, bring a variety of experience from their respective fields. And if you do have any questions for our panelists, then please leave them in the chat box to the right, I believe it is, of the stream, and we'll try and get to them at the end. So you've probably seen our panelist bios in the event, but let me hand over to each of them now for a quick intro to themselves and why you should listen to them. Conrad, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, why not? Thanks for the warm introduction, Deco. I know you've introduced yourself as David Cooper, but I know you as Deco, so I'm going to stick to that. So my name is Conrad. I am the CEO and lead strategist at the creative copywriter. And we are an agency. In a very small nutshell, we do strategy and words. And to expand on that slightly, we blend the science of data-driven content strategy and psychology with the art of creative writing and creative thinking, essentially in order to help brands get their words right at every step of the funnel. I like to talk about funnels a lot. I'm sure I will a bit today. One of the reasons for us being here is that one of our biggest sectors, biggest industries is the SaaS market, the SaaS industry. We work with a lot of startups and scale-ups, helping them get their words right, helping them build their funnels and increase, sales and growth. So that's me. Who should I pass it to? Jake, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Conrad. So morning, everybody, or depends where you are in the world, I guess. Morning for me anyway. My name's Jake. So I lead Fountain's North American office. We are a digital marketing agency. So basically we do traffic and conversion. So PPC, SEO, conversion rate optimization and analytics. We do a lot of work with SaaS companies. We're not just SaaS specific. We have clients in all kinds of different sectors. So definitely looking forward to having a chat with these guys. I'll pass it over to Joel.
Cheers, Jake. My name is Joel. So in my own consulting and covering work, I do a lot of working with software companies, primarily enterprise to mid-sized enterprise firms, and then also doing a lot of auditing companies just entering the market and whacking a lot of moles in terms of messaging, positioning, conversion issues. For 2021, my big focus is on growing Case Study Buddy, and all we do is help customers capture, share, and cash in on customer success stories. There's a huge amount of overlap into B2B and software there, and I think we'll see some parallels today. But it's one of those areas where the more social proof you have and the more you have behind your product, the better off you'll be long term. So that's what my focus has been for 2021, and I will pass it to Tal.
Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Tal. I'm the investor in the room, leading investments for F2 Venture Capital. We are an Israeli early stage venture capital firm based in Tel Aviv. So we are generalists. We invest in different companies from different sectors. We do focus on B2B SaaS, and I think this whole marketing domain is very interesting. Also for our companies when they reach the initial sales, but also how startups are able to market themselves in front of investors. I think that's also a very important side of the business. So happy to be here, and let's get going.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, all. Those are our panelists, and let's just kick off straight away with our first question. So we're going to get some background on the software industry first. And Tal, it would be great to start with you, seeing as you finished with the intro. So 2020 was a wild year for everyone. But how do you feel SaaS companies adapted, and what was the uptake like as we started to move to more cloud-based software?
Yeah, so 2020 was a weird year, but 2021 is one of the craziest years I think that we've seen in venture capital and early stage, or in general startups. I think that the inflation in the public markets has really trickled down to early stage, and the multiples that SaaS cloud-based startups are getting, it's just absolutely insane. I mean, in Israel, every 2 days is a new unicorn. So things are really going amazingly well. I think that part of it is also the amount of money that is going into the markets and the fact that the interest rate is pretty low, but also that we have adapted as a community in the whole world that we need to go digital. And I think that the use of many SaaS tools has really scaled rapidly. So I've seen some of our companies feel a bit of a kind of a downturn in 2020, and then 2021 just totally shot up. So I think this year is going to be amazing. For me, as an early stage investor, I've really enjoyed markups for our companies, and I hope that continues. And I think that now that companies, or especially B2B SaaS companies, have been able to scale sales, now it's about preserving your customers and really putting in the effort to maintain customers and invest in customer success.
Brilliant. That sounds fantastic. And I think following on from this, what would be great to hear from the rest of the panel is specifically the marketing strategies of these software companies. How have they changed, if they have changed? Joel, do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, I think anytime you have an event like COVID that accelerates a market change, all of a sudden everyone is working remotely. The cloud becomes even more important than it already was. People are adjusting, in some cases, the backbones of their entire processes. And now you have all these new companies entering the market, and competition is getting fiercer. There's kind of this dual trend of the tools to do the marketing and to do conversion optimization, and the availability of talent to do conversion and content type work is increasing along with that competition. And so I have seen especially kind of a renewed interest, especially on the copywriting and content side. Companies are taking the conversion optimization side of things more seriously than they did 3, 5, 7 years ago. Increasingly too, though, as markets get more and more crowded, more and more saturated, what you're seeing is a lot of aping and a lot of parity. A lot of companies that are starting to look exactly the same, where the features are the brand and companies are homogenous, and whoever you find out about first might be the company you use or you bump from player to player. So increasingly companies are starting to, I think, understand that it's not enough to just build a really great product. You now have a lot more noise to contend with and a lot more expectation from users and new people entering the market who maybe don't bring the same baggage that the long-term customer base did. So there's a lot of emphasis both on the conversion side, a lot more noise. And I think companies are starting to clue into the fact that you're going to need to invest in more of a brand and more social proof and content to get found first in the first place.
Brilliant. I think it'd be great if Conrad and Jake, do you have any kind of thoughts on that, again, particularly from the marketing side?
I can chime in. So I think that with the report the study that we ran, we found that there was definitely a lot more emphasis and investment, time investment and money put into, well, 3 things that we saw kind of dominated, which was improving websites essentially. So as Joel said, that looking more at conversion rate optimization. So we saw website improvements, content and email marketing. And I suppose it's fairly easy to understand why. We were all kind of suddenly stuck at home. I'm sure you guys remember that, and some of us still are stuck at home. Naturally, there needed to be more focus on digital marketing, and those are kind of 3 of the main areas. But again, just to echo sort of some of the things that Joel was saying, while there was the emphasis, and again with our report we saw that across the board they saw greater performance in those areas. When we surveyed the users, the buyers of SaaS software, they still see website kind of clarity and navigation as being one of the biggest barriers to purchase. It's still an area where, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, where marketers, SaaS marketers, are probably not doing enough to clarify, to persuade, to compel, to convince, and to differentiate. And back to Joel's point, all these copycats, lookalike, sound-alikes are cropping up all over the shop. So when you've got this plethora of choice, who do you go for? If they all kind of sound the same and they're not really defining their unique value proposition well enough, and I think unique being the operative word there, then why should they choose you? I think that's one of the biggest questions in marketing. Why should they choose you? And perhaps these SaaS brands are going to need to work harder to answer that question.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Did you have anything to add to that, Jake?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I was reading a little bit last week about sort of different things that have gone on in the SaaS industry, and I came across quite an interesting study on LinkedIn, or an interesting sort of case study of a kind. And Tal, I think this might be a company that you guys are involved with, but it was to do with Monday.com, and so they released their S1 filing, which is the report you give to the SEC, the Securities Commission in the US, and it was sort of talking about their marketing investment a little bit. This piece that I read, and shout out to Clouded Judgment, is a really good blog on it. Now they spent something like 150 to 200 million globally on ads, right? Like on paid media last year. That is a scary. Like, I would not like to be the dude managing that. That's a lot of money to mess up, right? And it's incredible. And I don't know. I think probably nearly all of us have had like those YouTube ads from Monday, you know what I mean? Like they've been super, super aggressive. And that was really interesting when you compare it to the report, because Conrad, as you mentioned, when you look at the report, well, what are the things that, okay, the report shows how much have you invested in the last year? What have you invested more during the period of COVID? And then what has outperformed? And clearly you could see, right, okay, well, conversion rate optimization, content, even a little bit of PR, whether that's digital PR or whatever it is, like those have actually outperformed spend. But actually most businesses there over the last year, only 5% of them said that they'd increased their paid media spend. So I thought that was a really interesting example. But then I think possibly the reason for that is something like Monday, you're pretty much targeting anybody who's got a job on a computer, right? Like, it's such a universal product. Whereas, I work with quite a few different SaaS companies that are very, very niche in their offering. So they wouldn't want to be spending 200 million on YouTube ads targeting pretty much everybody everywhere. So I just thought it was a really, really interesting example. And like some of the numbers, and that probably goes back to what you were saying, Tal, about the explosive growth. And I think something else that was mentioned with this was Monday. I think they're in the top 10 publicly traded software companies or cloud-based companies in terms of growth last year. I don't think anybody would be surprised to see that Zoom was the fastest growing cloud company last year. So I just thought it was an interesting example. But yeah.
I mean, if you talk about Monday, so we had the privilege to invest in Monday at the seed stage and then also lead the A round. So it was an amazing outcome. I've never seen a team that executes as well as Monday on the marketing and sales. And like, let's be honest, I'm sure you saw the product that they sell. It's kind of task management. There are a bunch of those in the world. And when you really understand what Monday is about, Monday has a very interesting product in-house. It's called Big Brain. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but if you look at this one, they stated, and the whole marketing spend and every single thing they do is data driven, 100%. They don't use, like, it's not about gut feeling or hunches. Every single thing is measured, is documented, and know exactly each dollar they spend in marketing, what the ROI will be precisely. And that's why they were able to scale and grow as you mentioned.
I think that comes onto a really good point of the growth of of the sector generally. So there have been so many reports on software growth in 2021. Report Link being one, saying the compound annual growth rate was 21% up. So, Tao, do you think that, or do you expect to keep on seeing this sector grow in this kind of trajectory? Or as companies settle more to remote working, hybrid working, online working, do you actually kind of see this maybe leveling out?
I think it's only gonna increase. The reason is, if I go back to the first point, the amount of capital that's going to the market is crazy, and then all these companies that are raising the money have to show results, right? They have to live up to the expectations of their valuations. So they're going to just keep pouring more and more money into marketing and into bringing as many leads as possible. Now, it's not about the amount of money you put into the market or into the marketing spend. It's about how you do it and how you do it in the best way possible and how you optimize. And the winners will be the ones who know how to optimize this and do this based on data and not based on just like, hey, here's a really cool video I made, this, put this on YouTube and put $2 million a month and see what happens, and generate 1 month, you'll generate 2 million, the next month 2 million, and the other month 0. And they don't understand why. So I think it's only going to increase. And then we've got this whole trend of product-led growth, which is also another topic we can touch if you would like. I think that's also an amazing trend that you can see more and more, especially with enterprise kind of domains like cybersecurity. Who would have believed that you can go bottom up? Look at Sneak, that now valued, I think, at 7 billion. They went from the developers, it's a developer first, let's build a product that anyone can onboard. And through building an amazing product and the fact that you need to invite more people from your team to use it in order to build a holistic solution, they've become a monster in what they do. So I think it's only going to grow, and more trends like product-led growth, we'll see them emerging.
I think that segues really nicely into, as you were saying, looking at data and doing things by data, not just by gut feeling, into actually some questions on the actual marketing then within this sector. Actually looking at what the mistakes are. Jake, starting with you, what mistakes have you seen from SaaS marketers?
I mean, I would say that a lot of the things that I've seen that have been mistakes aren't just SaaS. Like, they're things that I see going wrong a lot, and maybe the other guys can talk, but there are a few. Okay, so first off, I would say when we start off with the client, the first thing we want to look at is what their analytics setup is, right? We want to figure out what's going on with that company. Therefore, we want to look at how their analytics and how their tracking is set up. More than 3/4 of the time, it's broken or it's wrong when we start looking at a company. And that's for everything from multi-billion-dollar companies that we work with down to SaaS startups. That is nearly universal. And the reason for that is it's actually not really easy to get right. Like, tracking and modeling attribution across all of the digital platforms is fiddly. Like, I've been doing this for ages and I still find it extremely confusing at times. And there are smarter people at Fountain who I just go, can you help out with that, please? Number two, and I'll talk about the paid media side of things. There's still so many companies out there wasting significant spend. We've seen companies over the last year that we've started working with that have wasted, and one had wasted, it's not 191 million or whatever Monday had spent, but more than 50 grand US of wasted spend just by not implementing things like negative keywords properly into their paid media campaigns, which, that just makes me mad. That would be a really nice holiday to Hawaii, or like a nice day, there's a lot of good things you could spend that money on, right? So, these are things. I think the other thing is, and Joel, I know you said, and I agree with you, that a lot more people are focused on conversion rate optimization. I know that Marcus, one of our founders here, has been banging on about CRO as kind of the most underutilized tactic within digital marketing. And I still see a lot of websites that I go to where the user journey is quite convoluted, or they aren't really optimized for speed or mobile. Like simple CRO things. We're not even talking about complex split tests or anything like that. But really, some of the foundational pieces are still broken. And I think definitely the companies, because it is going to become an increasingly crowded market. There's not going to be just one person who's had your idea about a product. So in terms of differentiating yourself, all of these things are going to be crucial. And because it's so competitive, you need to get it right. I think last off, the one piece that I'll see is there's a lot of companies that I see that either don't focus enough on paid or distribution, or don't focus enough on content. And I think the companies that will win from a marketing standpoint are the people who are doing both. And I don't just mean sort of running lead mags. okay, you come up with lots and lots of really, really good content. Well, make sure you're getting it into all the right places. Don't just sort of pump some keywords into it, hope that it will rank on Google. Like, how do you go about getting it in front of the right people? And also, don't just run Google search and some Facebook ads and hope that you're going to win. Like, what are you putting there to actually convince the customer to come and have a look at you? And one thing that we have seen with the pandemic is you can't really go to conferences anymore. There's lots of stuff like this. There's fewer events. So a lot of marketing spend is going into paid media. I mean, LinkedIn is hugely crowded. Prices have increased. CPMs are up a fair bit on Facebook. We're going to lose cookies. So I think, given all of these different factors, A, it being more crowded, and B, it being harder to track stuff, these are things that you really, really will need to get right in order to stand out from the crowd.
Thanks very much. Yeah, brilliant. Does anyone want to jump in on that then, Conrad?
I can talk about mistakes. So I think a few have been flagged up, and I think that Tao mentioned, in answer to the previous question, the idea of data-driven decisions, right, rather than gut feel. And I think that's just like such an age-old, huge marketing blunder, which is you see across the board. Again, like Jake said, it's not just exclusive to the SaaS industry, but so many marketers base their decisions on gut feel, on I call it the inside out approach. Like, oh, I've got this idea, let's run with it for a campaign, rather than outside in, which is, making those decisions based on really, truly getting inside the minds of the prospects that they're trying to take on this journey. And by doing so, I mean by listening to them, by talking to them as a first step, implicit and explicit data collection, gathering data, voice of customer data, which I'm sure Joel knows all about, where you're really listening to them and even taking the language, words and phrases that they're using, weaving it into your content and your copies, because it's going to resonate, rather than just, again, as I said, being a sample of one or a sample of 10 and going, we think this is a good idea. You're not the target audience usually, and there's a much larger audience out there, and really surveys, buyer interviews, keyword research, social listening, that's where you should start. And then I think that's kind of probably the first problem that marketers make in the SaaS industry. I think also, as I mentioned, lack of clarity is a huge one, and we saw that with the report itself, with the study. But I think if you follow step one, you're much more likely to get step two right, because it's not just you trying to describe your software. And there's this thing we call the curse of knowledge, where it is quite hard to get outside of your own head. If you've been looking and involved in your software and marketing comms for months and months and months, your prospects maybe have 6 seconds to read that message. So I say clarity. I think instant clarity is really, really crucial. And we mentioned lack of differentiation as well, which I think is another big one because of the copycats out there. And the last point from me, I think, which is something I know Fountain you guys would very much agree with, is full funnel. It's full funnel optimization. We've kind of, because we're in the business of words, we like to say full funnel word optimization. By that, I mean, especially when in scale ups that are kind of getting bigger and bigger, I feel like in larger companies, departments get siloed. And then often marketers have their main KPI is lead volume, right? How many leads they're going to get through the door. And then it's over to the sales team. They're often butting heads. They're not talking to each other. They're not communicating, which is a huge mistake, because as we know, not all leads are born equal. And if your main goal is to get the highest number of leads through the door, you're not focusing on the quality of those leads, the customer lifetime value, which is a crucial metric in the end, which contributes to the end KPI, which should be revenue growth, really. So I think that marketers should be much more involved in full funnel. That's including the sales process and post-sale. How can you retain customers for longer? How can you push referrals? How can you, upsell, cross-sell, and increase that customer lifetime value, rather than just being short-sighted and thinking, let's just push as many leads through the door as possible. And you might find, back to the sort of Pareto theory, that 20% of your leads are actually account for 80% of the revenue. And if you kind of double down on that, you can really focus on the leads that are really going to be generating more sales, more revenue, and retain longer and really grow the company.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. Joe, do you want to add to what Jake and Conrad have already said?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it pointed. I think across organizations of all sizes, there's some really common things. We talk about clarity, but where do clarity issues come from? And for those listening, how do you solve them? I think one of the number one things that I see as an issue is that for companies right now, feedback is an event, not a system. It's let's go to market and get some feedback. Oh, let's run a survey and get some feedback. It's these one-off blips, these one-off little data collection periods, and then we look at it and we analyze it and we do something with it. And while that is the status quo today, it puts you at a tremendous disadvantage compared to those who have built out systems for talking to their customers ongoing, watching how their behavior changes when things like a pandemic come in. How many companies do you think understand clearly the before and after of even their user base prior to something like this? Very, very few. And so for companies at all stages, my top recommendation is always treat feedback like a system you engineer, not an event or a campaign. And it's similar with marketing. We treat marketing like individual campaigns and not ongoing discussions. There is something to be learned and brought into your messaging from each one of these. When we see clarity issues come through in sites, on the enterprise side of it, what's happening often is you have so many different voices contributing to different efforts with no sort of unified North Star that things become very muddy. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, for small startups and small companies where maybe it's founder-led marketing, it's that curse of knowledge, that not having any system or ability to step outside, no way of collecting feedback on going and making that useful. And so I really do believe in all fronts. One of the things that came out of the report is that customer reviews are massively important to people when evaluating. How are you going to get customer reviews if every single time it's this retroactive going back and asking for a favor versus generating that as a natural part of the discussion? How are you going to arrive at clarity for your audience when it's huddle around a boardroom table, look at a point in time piece of data, and then put it backwards? I think the best companies want to build systems and not have events. The second thing I do just want to tag on to the end of this is we've talked a lot about data today, and I do think it's important. I've made a career out of voice of customer data, looking at behavioral interactions and all that, but I don't want to kill the notion of creativity. There's no data point you could look at that would tell you that people would love MailChimp's design and logo. There's no, and they built a huge brand off of a funny little monkey. I guarantee there's people who buy purely because of they've read that ancient piece on SurveyMonkey's, or not SurveyMonkey's, but MailChimp's design. So yes, follow the data. Yes, build systems to talk to your customers. Yes, you want to validate gut instincts, but at the same time, we are heading into a period with software where some of these squishy middle things, these unscalable brand efforts that make you stand out, are going to be just as important. And there's no data point that's going to be able to tell you that. So you need both. So systems, not events, communication being a discussion, not a campaign.
That's brilliant. I think that's such a valuable piece of insight there, to make sure that you're balancing the creative with the data. And kind of going off of what quite a few of you have said, particularly yourself, Conrad and Joel, what we actually saw from our report was that SaaS websites and product clarity were a massive issue for software consumers and potential barriers to purchasing. And so what are the main ways that marketers can overcome poor clarity and barriers of a similar nature?
Is that targeted at me or?
Yeah, John. Right, yeah.
Yeah, a good question, because I've been dropping the clarity word into the discussion. So, not to rehash what I've just said, but I think first of all, start with this outside-in approach, as I like to call it. I'm not going to repeat all of that, but it does help to lead you to a place of clarity, because essentially you're trying to translate your software to the target audience. And so you have to start with their pain point, what keeps them up at night, and try to marry that up with the solution that you provide. So start with that, the data. I completely agree with Joe. I think that one of the reasons why we at our agency talk about the art and the science is very much for that reason. You don't want to get stuck in analysis paralysis and not sort of innovate. And I think probably to really succeed in marketing, you kind of need both, the art and the science. And back to clarity. So step one, start from the outside in. Step two, I mean, really, if you have, I think especially for startups, if you haven't done this already, follow a process of, a brand DNA or strategy process to clearly define your unique value proposition. In order to make it unique, you need to do competitor analysis as well, right? You can't make something unique without understanding the landscape and then essentially zigging while the industry zags. But you want the zigging to be relevant. That's why you did the initial kind of buyer persona work and buyer interviews and surveys. So I'd start with collecting this various forms of data and then following a process to define your unique value proposition, which would be can start as a couple of paragraphs and then have a more distilled version, which might be a paragraph, and then have an even more distilled 1 or 2 lines, which is some might call your elevator pitch. And then step 3, probably hire a copywriter or a copywriting agency to flesh that out and bring it to life. And I think that, I mean, obviously I'm biased, and I think too many companies and SaaS companies make the mistake of just getting any old marketer to write their messaging when there's a science and an art form to it, and it's so important to get that messaging right. Like I said before, you have 6 seconds to kind of grab their attention and to make them understand why are they there on that website, and to give some more tangible copywriting tips in terms of making things clear. Go for don't go for more complex words. Go for simpler words. Chop long sentences down into shorter sentences. 1 thought per sentence, ideally. Even things like chunky paragraphs. It's such a mistake that we've got this framework called the 13 lenses. One of the lenses is called the goldfish lens. The argument being that we have the attention spans of goldfish these days, and if people see a paragraph that's quite chunky, they just won't read it. And that's just that. Some will, but you'll lose lots of people literally from having a chunky paragraph. So even breaking things down and breaking a paragraph down into maximum 3 sentences per paragraph can have this huge effect on conversion and on that clarity and them understanding exactly what it is that you're offering. So that was a little bit more micro, but a few little takeaways there.
No, that's brilliant. And Joel, you actually mentioned websites earlier. You were the one to bring it up. So can you jump in and give us some insight here, particularly with your experience as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can do as a very practical exercise, go print off your homepage, then get a big black Sharpie marker out and cross off every bit of body copy. Leave only the headlines and subheadlines. If there's no reason for somebody to care, and if you don't understand what your thing is or does or that sort of thing, you need to revisit it. In general, we do read when things interest us, but I think a lot of people are still writing websites and software websites, assuming people are going to read it like a book from top to bottom and systematically through the pages. Anyone who has ever watched a recorded user session can tell you that is absolutely not the way people engage with your pages. I have seen behavior very common today. Go to the footer, read the page in reverse. If you don't know that, there is no insight for you to go back and say, we should probably emphasize this here or rearrange the page. I think things like voice of customer, and when we talk about voice of customer, it's what Conrad is saying, understanding in your customer's own words what their pain points are, what their objections are. Go talk to your sales team or look in your inbox today and see what questions are you getting all the time. That is indicative of questions that your marketing materials are not answering or not answering well. And keep in mind, again, in terms of we love data, we love to see it, but just because the data says ease of use is important for you and every other software company on the planet doesn't mean your headline should be easy to use X thing. That's going to be, again, parity with everybody else. It's important, I think, to do this voice of customer work, to get in their own words, pain points, anxieties, desired outcomes, so that you can mine that feedback And that's why I talked about a system of feedback earlier. You can go to customer reviews. You can look in your chat logs. You can go look at competitor reviews and see what people don't like about them, and then subtly position yourself against it if that's a strength for you. But you have to get out of the boardroom and into the world. And you have to get out of the tendency marketers kind of unfortunately developed over the past decade to treat people like cardboard cutout personas and not actual humans with pressures and deadlines and teams they have to sell up into. I think that's the other point that I want to make for software specifically is you don't just have to make clarity a priority for the buyer or for the person evaluating. You need to make clarity clear, for lack of you need to have that clarity for everyone that buyer needs to go and convince. The person evaluating your solution might not be the person pulling the trigger, especially in B2B SaaS. The number of people evaluating a purchase is going up, not down. It's the opposite of what I expected in a world where information is freely available. The number of touch points in an internal decision to a B2B organization is going up. You need clarity and content for each person in that decision. If the CTO or the CIO has the ability to veto the entire purchase because they can't see that you're compliant in an area, it doesn't matter how well you appeal to the marketer. And if the end user doesn't feel like it's something that they will actually use or adopt, if they don't see the value, it doesn't matter what VP trots this solution back to the team. You're not going to keep that customer. They're going to churn out. So clarity as a priority in messaging across the entire spectrum of not only your initial evaluator, but the person making the call and then the end user, that becomes enormously important as well. So a lot there, but I think it really does come down to having a system to talk to your customers, being intentional about how you use that information, not settling for the same old messaging where it's, okay, ease of use is a pain point, so let's just say easy to use. That's the lazy marketing side of things is going to be a losing strategy in the near-term future. And then as a practical thing, print off your homepage or print off your page, black out all the body copy, and if you don't get it, redo it.
Yeah, I think invaluable there. But I've noticed that Tal is sitting quite comfortably in the corner there, so let's throw a question his way. The next question is, as the market becomes more competitive, how can SaaS marketers ensure their brand stands out? It's something that we kind of touched upon earlier with uniqueness. And actually, what should SaaS companies be looking to improve in the future to stay ahead of that competition?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and brings me back to a question that I have, because to be honest, I have no idea how to answer this because there are so many companies, so many domains. And then when I work with our companies on the board level, and they talk to me and they present the board, and you go through sales and product and technology, and then we get to marketing, I'm always confused. The reason I'm confused is because I feel that I don't know what they want. I feel that they aren't quite sure why they are even doing the marketing. But like, it's known that you need a CMO, you need a VP marketing, you need to do marketing, you need the website, you need materials. But what is the why? Why are you even doing it? Is it to position yourself in the market against your competitors in the, I don't know, top right corner, like those 2x2 competitive landscapes, or is it to bring more leads, qualified leads? And my question to the panel, because I'm really a bit confused about this, where does an early stage B2B, B2C, SaaS companies, software first, start even with marketing? And should they start with it, or should they focus on product and then only bring it later? And if they do decide to start with it, what should they do with it? Like, should they focus on positioning, on bringing leads, on enhancing sales? And what's the thought process or the mental model behind that decision? And David, I'm sorry I took your thunder, and I'm asking questions, by the way.
That's fine. I can sit here quietly.
Shall I have a stab? I mean, for us, we would usually start with brand strategy. It's almost like building the foundations first. We get startups coming to us looking for content and wanting to drive leads, etc. And we might have a look at their website, have a look at their brand, ask them a bunch of questions which they can't answer, which is our brand exploration sheet, and quickly come to the conclusion that they haven't got some of the things I mentioned. They don't have a clear understanding of their value proposition. They don't have values. They don't have a clearly defined personality. So we would usually start from a marketing perspective with brand strategy to really lock down the core essence of the brand, and all of those decisions can then filter through to everything else. Like, everything kind of makes sense from that point. You know, if you build a content strategy on top, if we're now starting to build the walls of the house, let's say.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's so difficult to do with an early stage startup, because you're going to pivot, you're going to move around, your values will change, the market will change. So like, to go through the iteration every time, like, should I do it when I start the company, or at what stage would I do what you're describing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have a solid answer for it, because, you know, pivoting is, you know, obviously when you're branding, longevity is something that you're trying to include. It's one of the keys of branding, right? Making sure it's durable. And naturally, early stage startups do pivot, and especially during COVID, a lot of them had to pivot quite drastically, in fact. So what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know. The question is, if you don't have a solid brand strategy, at least even if it's not one that might need to adapt at a later stage, are you going to be able to convert? Are you going to be able to compel, convince, and convert your target prospects and drive those leads and drive that revenue if you don't have it? So that's my question. You know, can you, unless you have some amazing salespeople, but again, they will need to be singing off the same hymn sheet, sales and marketing. And I would say that it would be very difficult to reach your growth goals without having a solid brand that is unique, has differentiated because you've done competitor analysis, does have the right messaging, the right words, is speaking the language of your prospects, and ticks all of those boxes whereby is authentic to you as well, and relevant and everything else. Regarding pivoting and what happens then, you know, if you have to drastically pivot for whatever reason, it might mean that you have to go for a rebranding stage phase, and that does happen. I'm not sure if that's the answer you wanted, Tao. I don't know.
No. I think it makes total sense. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just like thoughts that I have when I work with my companies, because I always feel that marketing isn't my strong side. So when I see the marketing, I'm always like, how do you even get to this, and why? And sometimes they have good answers. Sometimes I'm not quite sure it's the answer I want to hear. But yeah, I think it's makes sense.
Jake, you both mentioned like using data, so just one of you want to jump in and talk about this as well?
Yeah, and like you've kind of preempted my answer as well. I think, you know, Conrad, you know, talking about sort of the brand side, like critically important, messaging, clarity, all of that. But I think as well for any business, but especially with SaaS, which is a very, you know, the numbers are quite clear, right? Like, you know, depending on what your price point is, what your subscription is, like, you know, right, what should your customer, I mean, it might be hard to know as an early stage startup what your customer lifetime value is. If you've only been around for 2 years, you don't know whether customers are going to stick with you for 5 years, but you can model that, right? And I think something else that is really, really important at an early stage is to know what your numbers are, right? Okay, well, this thing we can sell for this amount of money, we think, and we think that people will stick around for this long. We know that we're making this much margin off this customer. Therefore, how much can we actually spend? And I think a lot of businesses don't actually do that, both SaaS and elsewhere, right? Because that then defines, okay, you've got, here is our thing, here's what we're doing, here's what we're selling. Let's be as clear as possible with that. But you also need to know, well, how much can I actually pay to get somebody? And, you know, if you're selling a subscription for $20 a month, well, you probably can't use LinkedIn. You know, like if your keywords are then $40 a click, you probably can't run on paid search. You need to think again. And that really should be what defines your guide rails for which channels you can use and which channels you can't use in terms of the stuff you can see. I mean, obviously nowadays there's all kinds of, Joel, you reference this, there's all kinds of stuff you can't measure, right? Like there's never going to be, you know, for me as an agency trying to grow an agency, I can do all the paid media, all the public speaking I like. But if my client at a CMO says to another CMO, you should talk to Jake, he's really good. Nothing beats that, right? And that's very, very hard to measure. But there are certain things, no, as I say, SaaS is quite a data-driven, and it isn't like, hey, we might sell this for this at this point. You kind of know if you model it out. It's all spreadsheetable. And I think doing that exercise very, very early on, along with the messaging and the clarity and, you know, figuring out who you're talking to, what your addressable market is, that's really, really important.
Can I just add a tiny bit to that? I think that, yeah, forecasting models is a no-brainer if you can do it. But not only, you know, for the marketing team, but in terms of investment decks, that's a lovely 100%. Thing to put in there, and very rarely in there. And in fact, Jake and I have been working on one of what I believe one of your clients, Tao. So it's forecasting is the way to go.
Which one? Come on, give me some some intel.
5 Sigma.
Yeah, 5 Sigma, great.
That's a great shout out to them. Joel, you've been awfully quiet over there.
I want to propose an idea that I think will scare the living daylights out of some founders, but I think you talk about, okay, chicken, egg, what order does this happen in? What muddies the waters for products is, number one, if you don't have a clear vision of the problem you solve, a well-defined definition of why you exist and for who, it doesn't matter what you build, you're going to be flying by the seat of your pants. So for me, it starts before even the product is what is the vision? How well do you understand the problem you want to solve and the people you're solving it for? The idea that I think will scare founders and engineers alike is I want to propose the idea of product as hypothesis. When you put something out there, you are learning. This is why I want companies to think about feedback as a system, not an event in time. Because if you are only doing feedback as an event, you are only getting a glimpse of point in time back. You are not getting this chance to evolve along with it. You may miss opportunities to pivot. You may be charging down a vision that no longer makes sense, and the only person who doesn't know it is you. So product as hypothesis means that you are building this thing, you are collecting feedback on the voice of customer level, on the behavior level, on the user level as you go. And where marketing comes in is the response to what you learn from that. We started with a clear vision. We built a product as hypothesis. We built a system for feedback, and we either validated what we believed our vision and direction was, or we fell flat on our faces, learned from it, and now that we have a system, marketing can evolve with it, because you're fooling yourself if you think that the headline you put on your website today is going to live and last 2 years from now. Go look at Basecamp. Their headline changes all the time, and it's not just because they're split testing. It's because they are evolving in their understanding of their market and their customer. The headline you had before the pandemic likely needed to change in the middle of it. So where marketing fits in it is marketing should not, I don't believe anyways, be the engine driving the product. I think the product and people's experience of it is the hypothesis that then feeds back into the marketing once it's validated. So when you have a system to do that, you're good. When you're just blindly building product and then marketing it without feedback, you're not good. So I think it comes down to what's the vision, what are we learning, and then implement and pivot as you go. But you can't do that when marketing is, again, a monologue or a campaign and not an ongoing conversation.
That was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aware of time, and we have got a fantastic question from the audience. So I'm just quickly going to pitch that out there and blindside you all. So someone from the audience has asked about product categories, and that they've spoken internally to people within their company who have described the product differently, and that feels problematic. So how would you get around that kind of issue? That's quite a common problem. Conrad, do you want to jump in on that?
Can you just repeat that for me, please?
Yes, yeah. So someone is in a new role in a SaaS company, and everyone they've spoken to internally has described the product differently. That's problematic. So how would they get around that?
Good question. I sort of don't want to rehash all the same points again of talking about, outside in, being the feedback loop, as Joel is talking about, and voice of customer language and data. Start with kind of, as I said, from your customer's experience and their pain points, and marry that up to the solution that your products, the software is providing. In an ideal world, you do that. Obviously, there's bureaucracy and things like that. But I think, you know, when it comes to, let's say, a branding process, brand DNA process, involve stakeholders, right? It shouldn't just be an external agency, for example, and one marketer. You need everyone singing off the same hymn sheet, you know, both kind of external facing staff and internal. So there's kind of internal branding processes you can go through to get everyone on board with that. And I think it's crucial when going through a branding process or rebranding process to do so and get everyone on board with it. Otherwise, there will be those discrepancies and there will be people describing it in different ways. But perhaps if everyone is describing the product in a different way, then it kind of points to the fact that within said startup or organization, they haven't gone through that. They haven't defined it well enough. You know, and the pain point that the product solves just isn't clear enough. So it kind of, that's probably a situation whereby you need to do some of the things that we've been mentioning today.
Brilliant. I think that adequately answers that question. So moving on to the next one, and I know that myself and Jake have talked about this endlessly, so I'm going to head to Jake first. But there is a debate which has probably been raging since businesses realised that they could sell to each other, and that's how do we market differently between B2B and B2C, and how can SaaS marketers manage that successfully?
It is a really interesting discussion, this, and like I think you can sort of go in a few different directions with it. I mean, I was in the shopping mall yesterday, and you know, I'm in market to buy a new pair of sneakers, everybody, just in case you've got any to sell. Like, I probably want first-hand ones, though, really. And it's one thing trying to get me to spend like $100 on a pair of Converse or whatever, and it's a very different thing trying to persuade probably a group of people. Or maybe trying to get one person to then sell to a group of people about, something that is a more significant investment potentially. I mean, like, sure, there are some cheaper, B2B products, but on the whole, you're talking about a bigger amount of money. All right, it's not coming out of your own bank balance, but it's coming out of your company's budget. And so I think that makes things a little bit differently. But what is still the same is that I still need to know when I'm thinking about shoes that Converse comes to mind quite quickly, or Vans, or whatever it is. So you need to have that availability, but then you also need to make sure that you're balancing that with, hey, when Jake is actually trying to buy this thing, when he actually has this thing that he needs to do, you need to be the one that's picked, if you see what I mean. So it's sort of that brand plus performance, I think, is a little bit. So there was a really, really good article in Marketing Week a little while ago, and it was done by Peter Weinberg and John Lombardi, who they're the sort of chief guys from the B2B Marketing Institute in New York, which is run by LinkedIn. Now, these guys, like, pretty much everything that I read by them is gold dust. Like, honestly, check them out. And the article was literally on this. It's like, what's the difference between B2B and B2C? And I think that they got it really, really clear. Strategically, it's pretty similar. You're still trying to get people to take an action. You're still trying to achieve that thing of, okay, I want to make sure that I have fame within my category, so that when my category is thought about, my name comes to mind. And then you also want to have that dual thing of, then when somebody is actually in purchase mode for buying that thing, I am the one that's activated. I'm not, they're not snuck away by somebody else's clever advertising or whatever it is. So that's kind of the same across B2B and B2C. But what's different is the tactics that you might employ, right? Because, there's different types of persuasion that you need to undergo. And especially when you're thinking about, I mean, this ties back to the Monday conversation at the beginning. I think the reason that Monday is able to sort of blanket advertise is because I think I mentioned, like, it's pretty much anybody, the price point product is almost applicable to nearly everybody, just as shoes is something that everybody wears. Now, I worked with a SaaS company that does something really, really specific. They do URL redirection, and they do it for like the NBA and like some massive organizations, but you don't need enterprise level URL redirection very often, right? So in that case, it's making sure that, okay, people know who you are if they do need it, and then at that specific point, and the tactics you'd employ for the different things are a little bit different. So I think that was an interesting thing, and definitely it's a free article on Marketing Week. Like, I would recommend everybody to have a look at it, and pretty much everything those guys say, because they're smarter cookies than me.
That's brilliant. Joel, do you have any insight on this?
Yeah, the risk of being crass: when you sell B2C, you're selling to a terrified ape. When you sell B2B, you're selling to a terrified ape strapped to a rocket. The hardware in our brains is not designed. We all talk about, oh, we live in the information age and the person has much more information by the time they contact you and this, that, and the other thing. What we don't account for is there is a glut, an absolute glut of information. We are not capable of processing every option, rationally evaluating every possible path. We simply are not. When you sell B2B, you are selling to a person. Yes, that person has pressures on them. Number one, there's that slogan, right? Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. One of the best slogans I think ever, because that is the risk. What you're selling to a person with job pressures. People are in B2B, especially if you're an enterprise, especially if you sell a product that impacts a backbone or a system of the business. They are terrified to make a mistake. Why do you think buying cycles are so long? It's a whole bunch of fact checking and poking around and making sure nobody's about to drive the bus off a cliff. So in B2B, I think the key difference is a mistake on the B2C side. Yes, it can be devastating, but the likelihood, the risk, if I buy a bad t-shirt, it's not going to devastate me. If I buy the wrong CRM for my business, the stakes are so high, not only for the business, but for me personally, I'm afraid of losing face. So when we talk about clarity and when we talk about the importance of voice of customer, it's not these novelty marketing cliches. It's not just, oh, ease of use is important. You need to ask that second question of why. And that's why it becomes very important. B2C, let's say you're selling a fitness program. Well, if I'm selling a fitness program to people who are young and trying to get six-pack abs, my messaging should be very different from if I'm selling to grandparents who want to be in a state to keep up with their kids. The platform and program might look very similar, but the why behind it is totally different. It's the same in B2B. One person's ease of use is another person's adoption, and I don't want to get fired for buying a team that the entire sales team hates and doesn't use. One person's ease of use is drag on their day-to-day. I don't want to spend hours learning a brand new system, pulling me away from my family and the other pressures that I have outside of work. That's why getting past this cardboard cutout of B2B people where it's like, sales Susan and she drives, it's like, that's all very unhelpful compared to getting your customers. If you want to take away from this little monologue I'm on, it's get people on a conversation, get them to talk about their product, but then ask them about the pressures they're under and what the consequences of making a mistake might have looked like and what parts of their jobs would be impacted. And if they've already bought from you, ask how it impacted their day-to-day, their team's day-to-day, their boss's day-to-day. That's where a lot of marketing gold comes out of, other than just these very nice cut dried, okay, ease of use is important and price point's important. It's going to be important for everybody, but the why behind that for you and your audience is going to be very different. And I think that gets missed in B2B where it's more obvious in B2C. So clarity, we've talked about it, I've harped on it. It's very critical, but that's a big part of the reason is you're still selling to a person under pressure, strapped to a rocket now where the stakes of getting it wrong are that much higher.
Brilliant. Conrad, do you have any quick points in this?
Quick points. I think I agree with all of these points from Joel and Jake. Yeah, I'd say that, there's more stakeholders involved, first of all, generally. And as Joel said, it's a higher consideration decision. So in B2C, you might be able to play on kind of emotional copywriting a little more, arguably. Not saying that we can't bring emotions into B2B. I think probably you can inject B2B copy with probably more emotions and emotional kind of triggers than the B2B world currently has. But I lost my train of thought there for a second. But yeah, so when we do buyer interviews, one of the things that we look for is that buyer's journey. And that essentially is who and what do you trust during the decision-making process. And again, depending on the client, in the B2B world, there are generally more stakeholders involved. And so when you're creating a content strategy, you want to create content not just for that initial buyer, but also to influence, the CFO, whoever, the CTO, whoever's involved, the other stakeholders. So basically just jumping on what Joel said.
Fair enough. And we really have come to the end, but just final thoughts from you guys, if you can come up with anything quick. Whether it's a new startup, new marketing strategy, copywriting tactics, what do you predict to be the next trend or insight we can expect to see in the near or distant future? Tal, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Well, in terms of B2B SaaS or marketing in general?
In SaaS.
In SaaS. I think that more and more businesses understand that they have to go digital after COVID. You're going to see more and more companies going only SaaS. The marketing spend is going to go up. The fight for the customers is going to go up. I think things are going to get more hyped and more cruel also. So interesting times.
Brilliant. Joe?
Yeah, make feedback a system, not an event. It's going to benefit you in your customer success stories. It's going to benefit the way and the volume and quality of the reviews you get. It's going to benefit the amount of insight you have into your customers and how they use your product. We pay a lot of lip service right now. Talk to your customers is the common refrain. Everybody loves to harp on it, and then they go away and they do it once and don't revisit it for years. So make feedback a system, not an event.
Jake?
When I started living with my wife, she had like 500 DVDs, and they're all now in a junk shop. And I know Gareth, RFD, sort of frequently will go through and like how many subscriptions we have. I know personally I'm annoyed at how many subscriptions I have that I don't use. I wonder if there's going to be some kind of Netflixization of this. I mean, I know, there are some sort of product bundles that you can buy, but maybe we'll end up with that for some cheaper subscriptions. Like, okay, we know that this product works with this product. Maybe, something like that, or a meta SaaS, something like that will happen. I don't know. I have no idea, but it was something that I thought about in the shower this morning.
I think that's a brilliant idea. Conrad, to finish up.
I'm hoping that there will be some new forms of content that we can't even fathom yet. That's what I'm hoping for. New, much more interactive forms of content, because there's so much content saturation out there, and I'd love just there to be something that's, I don't know, on-site, off-site, kind of. I'm not sure what it is, but yeah, some kind of new form of interactive content that's just going to change the face of marketing as we know it.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, we've taken up far too much of people's time, and that is all we have time for. So thank you very much to all of you in the audience for listening. Thanks to all our panelists for speaking. There was some fantastic insights in there. If you would like to get in contact with any of the panelists, please contact them on LinkedIn. If you'd like to get your hands on the SaaS report that we put out, please look at the emails that are down in the description below, info@creative-copywriter.net or david.cooper@fountainpartnership.co.uk, which is my email address. I hope to see you all again soon, and a final thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.